It usually starts off by, noticing if a child is strongly siding with one parent and rejecting the other parent without justification.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life. This week, we had Anna Durstein on the show. We had a great conversation about what parental alienation really means, how it may affect your divorce case, and how to overcome it or allegations of it. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Anna Durstein is joining us. Anna is the managing partner here at Florida Women's Law Group and has been working alongside me for over almost 11 years now, I guess. Today, Anna and I will be discussing what parental alienation is, how to spot it, and how to prove it in the courtroom. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Hi, good to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And, this is it's a very relevant topic. I know we see a lot of it in the news, and I just think it's important to help folks understand, really what it is, how to spot it again. And, is it something that you can really prevail on in court? And Anna, I'd love for you to share for our listeners, even though you've been on the show before, but it's always good to update them just about your journey to how you got to where you are now professionally.
Yeah, of course. So I've always wanted to do divorce law. I've always wanted to go to law school. I've always wanted to be a divorce attorney. And luckily, during law school, found Heather and interned for her and the firm and loved what they did and never left. I'm not looking back. I became a partner about a year and a half ago or so and continue to help women here at the firm. And I love doing it.
Well, thank you. And we're so happy that you do. And today we're talking about something that you've had a lot of experience with, and that is parental alienation. So can you define for our listeners, what is parental alienation?
So so it's a little bit twofold. The term resist and refuse dynamic is generally what is considered to be a more accurate term than parental alienation to describe when a child resists and refuses seeing one of the parent, the rejected parent. Parental alienation was originally used to explain the child's refusal to see the parent as being caused by the other parent. So it's very behavioral to that aspect. Like that kind of goes under the category of the resist and refuse dynamic. The specific parental alienation, the wording, I know it's used a lot, but it's more so a type of a behavior that they do really versus kind of what it is.
Well, and so, of course, I've got my spin on this because I've read enough of it and I've seen it in action, over the years. Because
Mhm.
of course, it's always the mother's fault. And oh, it's your fault that the child doesn't like the father. When in fact, well, maybe it's the father's fault that the kids don't like him. And I guess that's what I'm hearing from at least the resist and refuse dynamic. It can be caused by many things versus parental alienation. They're saying, hey, mom, you are causing the child not to like
Your
the father.
behaviors.
Your behaviors are causing the child not liking the other parent because I guess in an ideal world, right? I mean, we're all just like Mary Poppins parents. And so a child would never refuse to be with the parent or resist being with that parent. I know I'm making light, which I don't mean to, but it kind of makes this big assumption when you're talking parental alienation that the other parent has done nothing that could cause such behavior.
Right. And sometimes there are those behaviors and sometimes there are not those behaviors. It's been around forever. I mean, it's not as if all of a sudden the last couple of years a parent's now doing something and they're calling it alienation. I think it's always been, it's kind of embedded and even in some of the time sharing factors that the courts consider. It's always been embedded. It's always been around. There's always been people doing those kind of behaviors. I think now it's just, like you said, it's in the media a lot. I think it's being widely recognized by a lot of people. It's also just thrown out
Mhm.
constantly by people. But usually, I mean, It does happen in a high conflict separation or a divorce or a post divorce situation, even. And it usually starts off by noticing if a child is strongly siding with one parent and rejecting the other parent without justification. So that's where you can go to so many ways. What is that justification reason? Is it domestic violence? Is there a safety concern? Okay, well, that looks like there could be some legitimacy to, right?
Hmm.
It's legitimate. But then it could be that somebody's just really angry at their former husband, former wife, or whatever. And it could be that they're influencing the child's behavior inappropriately through their own anger. And sometimes and I don't think somebody's sitting, I'm going to do this to alienate you from your dad. I think a lot of these, or your mom, I think a lot of these behaviors are, accidental, but when it eventually becomes a problem.
And that's interesting because I think that it runs the spectrum, right? I think sometimes it can truly be very intentional and very much, using these children to turn against
Right.
the other parent. And I would bet those are going to be extreme cases and not the majority. However, we've seen several very high conflict and unfortunately very often if they have the opportunity in these real high conflict type cases, they will use the children as a means to an end, unfortunately. But I like that you described as well that resist and refuse dynamic because I see the differences. One is, okay, this is what's happening. Now, is it being caused? Is it a parental alienation that the other parent is involved in? Or is there another reason for it? And that's the big question, right? That's got to be so difficult to prove.
It
Where is this
can be.
coming from?
It can be. And it is so it's so fact based because it's in any situation where a child is resisting the other parent, that's where it starts. And then it's based so much on the facts of the case. It's based so much on the history of the case. It's based on so much on the, court orders, prior proceedings, what's going on with other professionals, if there's therapists involved. But that's kind of where you look
Yeah.
at and you determine whether or not there was a good relationship. That's another big thing to look for. Was there a good relationship with a child and that rejected parent before the litigation, for example? If they
Mhm.
had just the best of time, they were a really, really great relationship, there was never any issues, and then boom, divorce, child's living majority with one parent or the other, and then something starts happening, you can start thinking about it, having those conversations to see what's going on, looking at the communication between the parents, looking at the interactions between the parents in front of the child, especially.
Mhm.
But a lot of times, usually there just wasn't a good relationship way ago from the start. And nothing changes when a divorce is filed. A relationship doesn't magically just it doesn't come out of the blue for these people.
Let's say a dad just ups and leaves, right? And then is like, I'm getting divorced. I'm in love with somebody else and I'm marrying this person and starting a new family. Obviously, we know that as our clients, the women, and naturally you would be upset, but so are your children. And those kinds of things can really affect a child's desire. And then, of course, to be with that parent, and they are probably going to have anger that needs to be resolved through therapy or at least addressed. The courts, the law, the statute reads in Florida that it's up to, I'm using the mom, like the one there, that it's my job to foster and encourage this good relationship with someone that they are legitimately upset with. And I do think that is a difficult. I agree. I understand. We want our clients to do that. We know that's what the courts are going to expect. But I think that's asking a lot of a hurt person who's trying to heal themselves. And then now I've got to pump them up to be with their dad when maybe I don't want to disparage him, but maybe I don't want to praise his name every day either. And how did that fall into it? 'Cause that's difficult.
Yeah. It is. Like you said, I think through therapy, I think that's something that shouldn't all fall on that one parent. I completely agree. I think that having a really good therapist in these types of situation is key and ideal
Hmm.
because it does become tough. You need that professional to maybe give you some tools and how to approach a situation because, like you mentioned earlier, a child could be very well aware, 13-year-old is going to be pretty aware that dad's all of a sudden gone out of my house and now lives with another woman. Like, he obviously left my mom. Like,
Mhm.
so they're gonna start feeling, they're gonna see some of this stuff. And yes, it is gonna become difficult. And obviously, some situations where we do see alienation, it's pretty extreme. A lot of those people are not doing any sort of encouragement. They're putting the
Yes.
kids in the middle. So that's where a lot of this, like, you need good professionals to
Mhm.
be able to help get through some of this stuff.
Now, is parental alienation a mental condition or situation, or how would you categorize it? Because I think that's a really good, important place to start.
Yeah. I mean, arguments have absolutely been made that it is a type of abuse. It's got some specific elements in each different situation, obviously, but some have argued that it is included in the DSM-5 under the parent and child relationship problems. It's not specifically defined. You're not going to see those words. You're not going to see parental alienation syndrome, resist and refuse dynamic. You're not going to see those words verbatim, but it could be argued that it does fit into the category of abuse, and it could be into that parent child relationship problems, for example. It can be argued to fit into it for purposes of the therapy that needs to kind of progress because of it.
Now, what are the hallmark signs of parental alienation?
It starts off with the child rejecting the alienated or the targeted parent without any legitimate justification. That is the biggest factor. That is where you start. Then there's an important distinction. Like I said, is there documented history of the rejected parent being abusive, neglectful, using substances? Because then that child's rejection could be legitimate. If it's legitimate, there is no alienate, that the starting with, there's no alienating behaviors. Now, it is also important to note that the rejected parent, they're not expected to be the perfect parent. So that's why every single situation and the facts are so important. And it's so important to gather those important facts to present to the court, because you can go to court, well, he's never been around, when you're not going to be ready for that cross examination if you don't have somebody that you're prepared with. And what does that have anything to do with being a safe, sound parent? It doesn't mean that, but you always have to be the favored parent,
Right.
but there is a distinction, and you have to start there. There's got to be the justification for the rejection. If there is something, then that's how we kind of go back and look at it. Because if there is that reason, it should not fall into the category of alienating or alienating behavior at all. We now need to look at that problem and resolve that problem and work on that issue versus alienation,
Mhm.
uh, and attack it from that aspect.
Now, is this triggered by a divorce, or can it just spontaneously happen?
I think it depends. I mean, I think in most of it, and what we see, obviously, and most often it is in a divorce
Mhm.
situation, because that's really when the parents separate, right? And that's when we kind of start seeing a child not wanting to go see the other parent, or the child rejecting the other parent. So it is, it's triggered through something like that. It's not like oh, this one little thing happens, done. This is alienation. This child's now this is what's going to happen. It's not that instant. When you're
Mhm.
under the same roof, it's kind of hard to tell a lot of times. The
Yeah.
parent could always have been, maybe subtly doing certain things that's getting that child to start, rejecting the parental, to start building that, the distrust with the other parent potentially. Separation happens or something like that. And that's when you start seeing that there's suddenly the child is
Right.
completely resisting the targeted parent altogether without any legitimate reason. That's the kind of things you look for.
Yeah, and which makes it so fact intensive, like you said. And for our listeners, that's like why if you think this is going on or this is an issue, you've really got to lay it out. And hopefully your attorney asks you a lot of questions. And it
Yeah.
may seem tedious, but you need to know. And of course, a timeline is also very important. And, because you did say a legitimate reason. And gosh, that could be so many things. But in your
Right.
experience, what would you say the courts would really validate as a legitimate reason?
Yeah, so they look at a lot of domestic violence, so domestic violence towards mom, domestic violence towards the child, domestic violence in front of the child. They're looking at those things because if the children are witnessing things like that over and over and over again, It could be abuse, physical. So, like I said, domestic mental abuse, mental abuse of the child. I mean, I've had dads who name call their children awful, awful names, and they're just, and things like that. They don't go away, maybe under the same roof, right? When mom's there and dad's there at the same time. Yeah, I'll sit at the table next to dad. Yeah, I'll sit on the couch and I'll talk to dad. But once mom is out of that picture and she's not around, and I just have to be one on one with dad, there's really not that kind of like protection, to say. So it becomes a little bit more prevalent then too, substance. So, like in those substance abuse situations, if a parent is drugs, alcohol, anything of that nature like that. I mean, those are children see things like that. There's a little bit of a legitimate reason to not want to be with that other parent. They don't want to be around a drunk parent. They don't want to be around a high parent. So there's like those are big legitimate reasons, and the courts do note those. I mean, they do
Mhm.
realize that. Well, I understand, you want to blame somebody, but let's look at the big picture. What was happening in that household
Yes.
before a separation? What led
Mhm.
up to the separation? What led up to this child with their perspective of this child no longer wanting to be with
Mhm.
you? What led up to that? So again, going back to the facts, what are the reasons that this child is rejecting a parent? A lot of times they're legitimate and courts do pick up on those. Those are the big ones, right? Those are the easier ones to spot. But then there's other ones, right? Parent's been gone, absent,
Yeah.
5, 6 years, just never seen this child. And 17 years old, like what, what?
Right.
So there's those types of other situations where maybe they're tougher to show to the court that
Mhm.
there is a little bit more legitimacy, judge. Let's look at the timeline. Let's look at the history of this involvement in this child's life. Like he, it makes some of those things do become legitimate.
Right. And when I know I started off by saying the mother was being accused, but this can happen. Certainly, the father, husband can affect the children and do this to the mom and
100%.
can, and really make it very difficult to show because I think part of the reason why it's difficult to show is and not that judges don't listen to the evidence, but they just have a hard time grasping in some cases that isn't overtly obvious,
Mhm.
right? Like where a child is going to tell a therapist, well, my dad said blah,
Right.
blah,
Yeah.
blah, because that doesn't happen very often. And so then without the overt, like just this is absolutely what's going on, because just for our listeners, we need evidence. And if you have the other parent, whoever is being alienated and trying to make this argument, they're not in that house usually anymore. So they don't have eyewitness, they don't know how and why it is being done. And they just know the result. And that's where I think it makes it a challenging case.
And it's tough because of time limitations, right? A lot of cases like this are so fact specific. So it becomes, the timing that you have when the court's like, I'm going to give you a day to present this entire case. You got to split that day. You can't take the whole day. You got to split it with the other side. It becomes really tough. And these kind of cases can linger for a very long time, which they shouldn't. That's when they get worse. The longer they
Mhm.
linger, they become worse. So judges do get a lot of, they get training on these. You see them there all the time and they do a good job when they can. But again, it's your job to present the evidence. It's your job to have those experts, and it's your job to make sure you have all the facts to present in the time allotted too.
Mhm. And I recognize, for our listeners, so difficult to understand. We do try to explain it to the clients how quickly time passes when you're in a hearing and there's so much you want to get in front of them. And it is an art. It takes so much practice and strategy as in how to get the information in front of the court in the time allotted.
Mhm.
Now, let me ask you, like, as an attorney, what do you do when the client calls and the child on either side, but the child refuses to go to the parent's house?
Yeah, that's a loaded, tough question. It could obviously, again, it goes back to the fact specifics. Was there a danger element? Was there substance element? Did the child just come back yesterday and said, Dad had alcohol bottles everywhere. He was so passed out, I couldn't wake him up. I don't want to go back. I'm scared. What are the facts? What are the reasons? The courts are very much of the mindset is that kids don't get to choose. That's their children. If we just let the children do whatever they wanted, it would be chaos. I've got little kids, and even now, like, it's still tough, but And they're going to want to push those buttons. They're going to want to try to do what they want. And they know they can tell when mom and dad are not getting along, they're fighting, they're not talking. They're going to use that. So you have to be very careful and you have to. That's why it's so important to have a conversation with your attorney about the background of it. This child in counseling, have they talked to the counselor about how to address some of these things with dad? And have you talked with the counselor about how to address these things with your child and what would work for them and what they want to see? And has dad been involved in the counseling for the counselor to be able to have that? It really does just depend on every single situation. So it's so important to be able to talk to your attorney before you just say, okay, sounds good. You don't have to go. Because that could really backfire. You got it.
As you were talking about that, then I'm thinking, okay, but then, there could be the issue that someone who has, adolescent boy, mom took away the Xbox or the gaming
Yeah.
thing or whatever because of grades. So no, I don't want to go back there. I want to go back to dad's because he's not paying attention or whatever. And it's like, or he's not going to impose the same type of rules, which that, it exists. And I know it exists in intact marriages, right? Different ideas on what is appropriate that you have to work through and try to come together on. But in a divorce or into household, those kids can know that again. So that's important to know because that would be relevant. And that's why we can't allow the children to run the show and why the courts are so apprehensive to bring the children in to testify or have a say in what is going to happen in the time sharing, because it could be very detrimental to them, I think, in the long run, is their thought.
And a lot of experts, a lot of psychology, a lot of experts will say when there is that dynamic, when the child there is a refusal. And again, like refusal, and I'm not talking about there's drugs, there's alcohol, there's like substance use, guns, I'm not talking about dangerous. I'm talking about like, I just don't want to go. Let's explore that. When you're putting that child in that position to make that choice, it's tough. Like, and then
Yeah.
that child, you're like, well, he doesn't want to go. I'm just going to let him take a break for a little bit. What's going to happen after that break? What happens when they don't want to go back again? What happens then? And then you're just going to keep letting him take a break longer and longer. The longer it goes, the worse it's going to become. And that's the problem in these types of situations. That's why sometimes you need to address it head on and you need to figure out what is the real reason that these kids want to reject the parent. And they're not coming to you and telling you that there's domestic violence or some sort of abuse or something so overtly obvious to why it's detrimental to this child to go over to one of the parents' houses.
Now, I mentioned this, but I want to reemphasize it and ask you because it is a common question. Well, do the children get to choose where they want to go? Because I know we have both heard that. Well, no, they want to talk to the judge. They heard that when they're 13, they get to choose.
That Google. I love that Google. No, I have never. There are certain judges that will say, okay, at 13, I will allow them to come to court to testify, but then they are very clearly like, I don't care what they say. I will make my decision no matter what. They don't. And there's not really a certain age where a child's opinion is going to be more so over another because like you mentioned earlier, a 13-year-old kid, mom's got all these rules in her house. Dad has nothing. Like, who wouldn't want to go hang out at dad's house, or vice versa if the rules are in one house and not in the other.
Yeah.
And the courts they're very in tune. They know that. So that's why they're so, your case is not the only case that they've seen. They've seen the cases where the kids are being manipulative, they're doing this on purpose. So they're very, very cautious about letting these kiddos come in and just say whatever they want to say. And then even if they do say it, listening to them too.
And that is, children have access to so much information in today's world. And I think just developmentally, there is a period of time where I think it could do them a lot of good to feel as though they have a say, right? Because kids never really get a say and they want to just be heard. And I think, I've had judges, say yes, some say no. And I don't really have a set thing because I think it's, obviously the parents, need to make a decision. Are they going to even ask, right, for the children to come before the court? So it's difficult, I think, in many situations to allow that to happen or then to not because, right, then they could be like, oh, then now they're so upset because nobody listened to them. But which is why we talked about in the very beginning, what you said, therapy, give them a place to have a voice is so important. then that can make a big difference, I think.
Yeah. And in a lot of situations, therapy, 100%. The key then, a good therapist, a good
Yeah.
right therapist who knows, who can spot a lot of these alienating behaviors, or who can spot these things when a child is, like you said earlier, too. A child's not sitting down there saying, "Oh, dad told me to say this. Dad told me not to go to mom's house." No,
Yeah.
it's very
Mhm.
covert. It's just these little subtle things. And that's why it becomes so important for the professionals that are involved to know some of these behaviors, to go to these trainings, to have some continuing
Mhm.
education related to this dynamic and alienating behaviors. It becomes very important to find the right therapist too, because a wrong therapist could do way more harm.
Absolutely. Now, have you found in your experience that there are certain situations where parental alienation is more prevalent?
I guess I would say it's not that it's necessarily more prevalent. The situations where I find that it is argued is in domestic violence cases. I feel like in those types of situations, those cases, the word alienation gets thrown around every single time. But again, there is a domestic violence injunction. There was a hearing. There's a court order. There might be supervised time sharing for a very long time. There might be no time sharing for a very long time. There could be so many different circumstances that surround it. The child could have witnessed it. And a lot of times the other side would be thrown out. Well, there's alienation. There's alienation happening. You're not letting me see this child. But again, got to go back to the facts. So I think that it's more, it's definitely thrown out in those situations. And a lot of times, like I said, specific facts, specific information, what is happening, that it could be shut down pretty quickly in those situations. If you've got the right facts, you've gotten the right facts from your client, and you can present those to make it clear that it's not.
Right. You have to differentiate that. Now, another term that is similar to parental alienation is estrangement. Could you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that?
So estrangement it's different. It's not alienation. It could be estrangement because the parent just have been absent for a very long time. So there could be a reason that this is happening. There is a big difference. There is some justification to why there is no relationship, because that relationship between dad and child, or mom and child, has been estranged for a very long time. So, I can definitely see this come up a lot in those cases where dad is, has just been absent. There could have been a final agreement that allowed him to have time sharing, but then he just didn't for 5, 6 years. And then all of a sudden he's like, okay, kind of want to come back around. And they're going to have an estranged relationship. And that dad might claim, oh, mom alienated me from the child. Mom's done all these things and it's her fault for, why this child doesn't want to see me. But really, you got to look at the big picture. There is the relationship between dad and the child, or mom and child, both ways.
Mhm.
There was something that happened. That long break, for example, could be the reason that there is that estrangement between the parents.
Now, how do you differentiate between cases of legitimate estrangement due to factors like abuse or neglect in cases of alienation? What kind of evidence do you rely on typically?
Very case specific. I mean, it could be emails between the parents. It could be text messages between the parents. It could be prior court orders, right? I mean, there's findings in those. There's orders to what each person is supposed to be doing. So then you going
Mhm.
back and, did that person do this? Did you allow this contact to happen like this order says it's to happen? What facts, what happens at exchanges, what happens when a child's talking on the phone with the other parent. It could be, it's so many different things that I look for and then I gather from each of my clients to be able to show what kind of behaviors are happening from both parents
Right.
to present to the court.
Now, another common term in parental alienation cases is parental gatekeeping. Can you explain more about what that means?
Yes. So parental gatekeeping, you see a lot. I mean, it's when one parent limits or controls the other parent's relationship with the child. Like I've heard, some professionals describe it as a literal fence and a gate, and it could be on a spectrum. You can open it just a little bit and a little bit of information goes through. You open it up a little bit more. So it could be very restrictive, just a little tiny bit. The court order says, I only have to give you this information. That is all I'm giving. The court order doesn't tell me to tell you this, so I'm not telling you. That can be very restrictive. So some of them not making the child being available when they're supposed to spend the time with the other parent, for example, or control the participation in the child's school or extracurricular activities. And they could be using like a court order as a crutch. Oh, you've never done this before. So why are you going to do that now? I'm not going to let you. So it involves Sometimes it could involve that. Could be sometimes could be legitimate. So we go back to that safety concerns. There could be drugs, alcohol. There could be a safety concern where a little bit of that protection is necessary for sure. But a lot of times when I see it that comes up is usually in those cases when a child is rejecting another parent and the other parent is claiming that one parent is withholding information. And how is that affecting a relationship between the child and that parent? It is very difficult. And again, it goes back to the fact, it goes back to the evidence, it goes back to being able to ask the right questions to find out everything that you can. Ask every single why, how, where, would you do the responses, right? I mean, you're looking for things where there's information being withheld both ways. My clients all the time, I'm like, is his name on every single form at the doctor's office? Is his name on every single form at the school? Is he an emergency contact at every single one of those places? Is he the seventh emergency contact that you listed on all of these places and he lives right next to the school? Like, these are the
Mhm.
things that I'm asking that maybe the other side hasn't even thought of to look for. But, we're looking for these things because I see it all the time when
Yeah.
you don't want to be surprised with those kind of things. It is really, you're just kind of like antennas go up when you're just like, what is happening that is limiting somebody's involvement in a child's life? Now, like I mentioned earlier, there was some sort of domestic violence injunction that says that the address for the mom is to be confidential, for example. You're not going to they can't argue gatekeeping because you're refusing to provide an address for where the child's living. The child's obviously living with you and your address is said to be protected. So there are limitations too, it can be, but that's why it's so important to have a conversation with your attorneys about these things because I see this
Yeah.
argued all the time. Well, they didn't provide me
Yeah.
this information.
In theory, for education, medical, religion. So,
Yes.
do what you can to figure it out. It's usually not that hard. I suggest, I always have to my clients because like I've received all the emails, and wait till they have like 7 teachers and you get like 7 different emails from each teacher. It's like 21 emails, like a day can happen, right? If they're kids. I always put my husband's email and they're like, hey, I'm not the only one here. Like you read through half of them, I'll read through the other half. It's not because that puts extra work. It is not up to mom to educate the father on what's going on with your child, right?
Mhm.
You need to
I
be
agree.
involved and you need to talk to teachers and talk to your kid because we all know anyone who has adolescents, they don't always talk and they don't always share everything that's going on at school or whatever. So, that's why I feel like this can be blamed sometimes on the mom. Is like, for the women out there who are like, yeah, that's neat. Well, there are ways to just shut down that argument. Put them on all the emails. They have access to the calendar, right? It's not up to you to tell them when the kid's off school, your children are off school. Like they can look that up. But then also these apps, as we know, are amazing to have solid proof of here's the access to everything you could want to know about what's going on with your child. And that's important too, because I think too often there's so much more of a burden placed on the mom because we know I have my side, right? And not necessarily, and they're asking for her to do that much more when it's like, well, if you want half the time, then do half the work and
Mhm.
figure the information out.
And there's always going, so, and this is where I think like the word alienation sometimes gets misused. The majority time sharing parent is going to have more information always, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
just natural, but it doesn't mean that they're doing something to prevent some sort of a relationship between you and your child as well. So it kind of goes both ways. So that's where you go back and you check all those forms. Is he listed on every single one? You could have forgotten to list him during your marriage. You might not have even listed him during your marriage, but you guys were in the same household when you did that. So you're just like, hey, it doesn't matter. But go back, check those things.
Mhm.
You're like, wait, is he listed as number two? Was his contact information updated for all those places? Did he change an email that hasn't been updated? I understand that well, I shouldn't have to do all of that. And I agree. I agree. You should not. But sometimes it could be something so simple like, let me check if I even listed him on there. Just going back and checking just to make sure it just kind of helps even your own fear about, well, he can't, if he decides to file something against me, like I know I've done everything I possibly can. And it's up to him to get some of this information as well, that I'm not the holder of all the
Right.
information.
Correct. Correct. And now something else to look for is adultification of children. So please explain.
Yeah.
Please explain it.
This is yeah, so this is really kind of when the children, are looked to as like allies or like a partner instead of like a child to a parent. So the children are being treated more mature than what they really are. So this happens a lot of time with the favored parent. There's a rejected parent and the favored parent. A lot of times the two of them become almost like allies. It's almost like they're like buddies versus like a mom and child relationship. Like, no, you're gonna listen to what I tell you what to do if it's safe and within reason, obviously, all that stuff. But so you look for that kind of stuff. You see when there is these children making decisions for themselves. They say, what they say goes. Parents send the message back. Oh, well, I asked. He said he doesn't want to. Or I asked. She said she doesn't want to go. So that's what we're going to do. They turn into they're making decisions way more above their level and what they need to be doing. It could really affect them mentally, could affect a relationship both ways with both parents, actually. Because once they get older, they could realize, like, wait a second, like, why did mom let me do all of that? And that wasn't fair. And that could come back on you too once they get older. So it's just, it's important to keep children matters, adult matters away from children.
And, so obviously this involves, letting them know what's going on in the litigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big one. I think that's the biggest one you see. Oh, there's a hearing coming up. I heard, how'd you hear that? Well, obviously it's from the other parent if you weren't the one to say that. And it shouldn't be involved. They shouldn't know that. Because, once a child, imagine this little kiddo, telling one parent, I don't want to go to your house. I just don't want to go with no reason. Right. And then being made to say that over and over again and having to say that over and over. I mean, and there is no legitimate reason, right? It's just,
Mhm.
it could be the mental abuse really that's happening with the favorite parent where they're making them say this. They're making them feel guilty if they want to see the other parent, for example. Like that little kiddo is so torn. That little kiddo just doesn't know what to do. I mean, it's very detrimental to these kids when that happens. But again, like I said, it's very fact specific. It's not in
Right.
every single situation where kids just like, I don't want to go. Gotta look at the big
Yeah.
picture.
Now, we were talking about that adultification because I wonder, what are the early signs or any signs that maybe the child is being adultified by a parent? And how can these signs be documented or observed in the context of a family law case?
Again, very fact specific, so sometimes you'd have the counselor involved, which hopefully you do in the situation where there is so much resistance from seeing a parent that you guys are working through something like that with a professional. But in those situations, you're looking at, is the child reporting to the counselor that, dad told me there's a hearing coming up, using words like, I know that there's a social investigation coming. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, how does a 12-year-old know what that is? There are certain things that you're picking up on and you're listening to and you're looking for. It could be between you and your own child, right? Well, I know that's what you're asking for from daddy, so I know that's what I know that's what you're going to ask the judge. How do you know that? And obviously I know with the
Yeah.
child saying that, so that's a whole different situation. But,
Mhm.
having these conversations with the other parent, and sometimes, some parents are just very open and be like, they're mini adults. They deserve to know what's going on. And that's their prerogative, but it's not appropriate. The courts are not going to find that to be appropriate. So it's a lot of these types of things. It's definitely documenting them through the counselor. Our son is talking about a social investigation. I've never discussed that with him. Can you sure that he understands there's something to be worried about, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
And there is the balance because let's say there are going to be professionals talking to them and you want to help them, you want to set the stage, right? You're going to have to say something. You take your child,
mhm.
okay, we're going to the doctor, we're going to talk to this person. This
Yeah.
person's going to come to our house and talk to us, but you need to do it in a way that is not divulging, you know, I guess things that are happening in court. And so
Yeah.
you need to make sure they know this. Like that'll come back to bite you for sure.
Or blaming the other parent for having it ordered.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing this because your mom wanted this. We're doing this because your dad
Right.
wanted this. He
Yeah.
asked for this. And we're doing this because we think it's the best thing that we need to do to determine what the next steps are, being very, very open and neutral about it. And it's hard because,
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of my cases where there is abuse, there's violence, I think that, those are tough because then you're having this conversation like this dad just abused us right in front, violently did something in front of these kids. And now it's happening. So that's why, again, it's a fine line. And that's why it could be very easy to cross that line and going into inappropriate behavior. So the court's going to take into account.
Hmm. Absolutely. Now, let's talk about another term that I've heard, and I want you to explain. Enmeshment
Hmm.
is another term. So, can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Literally, it's just it's no autonomy between the favored parent and the child. They're dressing the same, they walk the same, they talk the same, they say the same things about the rejected parent. They're essentially attaching themselves to the favored parent. The favored parent is attaching them to the child. It's inappropriate. It's not right. The child is a child. They need to be children. They shouldn't be these buddies with them. They're a parent sometimes usually trying to get some sort of like a fulfillment out of this relation. It's just not appropriate. We definitely have to watch out for that. But a lot of times it's when the kiddos are, at least I've spotted it when the kiddos are saying identical things. They're really, yeah, well, they used to have a favorite football team as a family. And then all of a sudden they're spending more time with one parent. And now they hate that other team. They only like the team that the parent that they're with all the time. It's really just no autonomy between the parent, the favorite parent, and the child. So you kind of look for that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, if it's as extreme as that, it would seem as though a qualified expert psychologist, psychiatrist could figure this out, could see that
Hmm.
easily as
Yeah,
that's
right.
inappropriate.
Agree. Oh, 100%. And it becomes a big thing to have to prove and the negative effects of that and having to prove that in court. If dad and her mom has so much animosity towards the other, the rejected parent, the favorite parent has so much animosity. And then that child is exhibiting the exact same behaviors, saying the exact same things, acting the exact same way that
Mhm.
the other parent behaves. There's something going on there. And it's again just another part of that dynamic and how that is affecting the relationship with the rejected parent.
Yeah, and there's so much here. I know we'll probably have to follow up with another episode just, to handle all the questions that this brings up. But, how does the recognition of parental alienation vary like across states? And what, should the attorneys be aware of when practicing in states that are more or less liberal in acknowledging alienation?
So it definitely varies, right? We know Florida law. I know the cases that come out in Florida, they're not that many. A lot of other states have more cases that come out from it, and they have more articles and they have more interviews about experts in those types of places. So it definitely varies. It varies judge to judge. I can have very similar fact patterns. They're all different, obviously, but I can have a different judge in the same county, and the two of them can be taking, different approaches on it, complete opposite approaches on it almost. So it just you really just never know, and that's why it's so important to have the appropriate experts to bring the right stuff in front of your court. I definitely think that other states they definitely recognize it. I see them recognizing it more and being a lot more cases coming out of other states than
And then
Florida.
that leads me to, because what's the relief, right? You're bringing this to the court and you
Mhm.
have this case, and then for our listeners, as attorneys, any attorney, you may say, Judge, this is what's happening, but you've got to ask for something, right? You need relief. Like, and this is what I want. And that can be difficult as well, right? As far as, well, how
Absolutely.
do we reverse this, repair this, address it?
It goes back to having the right professionals. It's so important. I mean, there is, having reunification therapy to be able to address that and repair that relationship, having a really good counselor for the kiddo that knows and can pick up on the factors. I mean, it could be just as detrimental to have a therapist who does not pick up on it.
Mhm.
And it could be causing way more harm. And it could be really hard to be able to go backwards. And sometimes you don't know that until it's too late. And I understand, not every single case is perfect, obviously. But even judges, they play a role, having a check-in hearings and things like that constantly happening in these types of situations to figure out like, what's going on, what kind of progress is being made. They need to be reviewed and managed regularly. It can't just be like, let's just see what happens and come back in a year and a half and see if something just magically happens. So it's having the right type of professional strategy, the right type of therapy. It's not, you don't have to only find a psychologist. It could be, I've dealt with plenty of good licensed mental health counselors. But again, it just comes back down to like, you have to have a good one and you have to look at their experience. You have to see what kind of
And
work
their
they've done.
training, right?
Yeah.
Have they had that training?
Because they should know, they should tell you. It should be on their website for what kind of trainings that they've even received. It should be
Absolutely.
pretty, yeah, it's not a secret. So you just need to know what to ask for and you need to know what to look for in these types of experts and then to make sure that the right people are on your case.
Absolutely. Well, Anna, this has been amazing. So much information that we will probably certainly have to have a follow-up episode. But before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
Of course, moms are superheroes. I'll say that first of all, and women are superheroes too. Every single situation is obviously different, but one thing that I will always remember and always know is that just seeing the client from the beginning and just remembering, I always try to remember how they were the first couple times, sometimes taking a couple notes just to remember, then seeing them at the end of the case and just seeing how much they've gone through and things they've done that they never thought they could. It's, you hear a lot, I'll never agree to this. He'll never do this. He'll never want to do this. And then they kept fighting, they kept pushing, they kept asking, and they got it. And it's so wonderful to see them not give up and to push through some of those things and just to see the importance of that and see how, see them also realize the importance of what they're fighting for and just see them come out on that other end. It's wonderful.
That's awesome. Well, lastly, Anna, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Yes, they can find me at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. Obviously, online, there's a lot of information and to be able to reach out to our firm by calling or reaching out via email, there's lots of options.
Well, thank you so much. We've reached the end of our show today. And again, thanking Anna Durstein for joining us to discuss parental alienation, how to spot it, how to successfully prove it in court, and much more.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. You'll find our practice areas in the link to our website in the show notes. Thank you for listening.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.